your 10,000-foot view, and we can dive down case review.
Okay, well, it pretty much fits the normal first project administration. This first task was just to help administer the contract, pay, to make the invoices and review the invoices and give a status report and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty usual stuff there. You see there's the task there. And then there's in-house coordination to make sure we get people knowing what they're doing and continuing to do the work and so on. So those things, that's kind of the usual stuff. Attend council meetings. I've got 4 there. May not need to be that many, but they're there if we need them, and so on. So you want to go each one and ask questions about project administration. Any questions or concerns about that?
So what's the total cost for this agreement? Is the 93?
Yeah, 95. Yeah, 93.
93,396. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. Anyway, yeah, 93. And we can move along then. The next one is a minor item, utilities coordination. A lot of the stuff that you may remember that I had, we talked about over and over again here over the last year or so. It's now back in the city's hands with Jim and Ken. So I've taken all that stuff out. So utilities coordination is one of those. We're only planning on providing information and support for the city as they deliberate with P.C.S. and choose down energy, electricity, and gas, as well as CenturyLink. However, I think there's some maybe minor issues with Comcast. I think they generally go along with the telephone company, though. And so that's a minor item, but nonetheless, it's there to be used if the city needs help and information. The major item here, I did skip over one. We got to do the surveying. I mentioned in the past that there was some redo on some of the surveying because of the preload thing that was out there, and now it's gone, and now the land is different. The topography is a little different, so we need to go in there, resurvey, make sure we get the right quantities and that sort of thing. So that's the major part of this. There's relocation of those. That one set of transmission poles that created revisions on the east end of one of the Gordon parcels. So that gets us into revising some right-of-way plans and some things. And then there is the offset to where the new power poles and the southerly transmission line need to be located so they can move them as a kind of a first order of work before the contract gets going. Get that southerly line moved north of the new curb line. So we'll need to relocate those. Let's see. And then, of course, again, the revisions to the right-of-way plans for the Gordon parcel on the west end, where that new pond goes. And that's primarily the major work. Updating the right-of-way plans, producing legal descriptions and exhibits to match, and then that's the surveying and mapping task. As far as back over now to test 1300, which is the final right-of-way PS&E. That is the big item in here. There's substantial work to go back and remove some of the items out of the contract or out of the design, namely the intersection with Valentine. And that's going to be a simple matter. It's not a lot of work. It's crossing out and circling and saying not in the contract, but nonetheless has to be done. Probably the bigger issue there with the removal of work is getting the quantities and the specifications correct. So we'll need to redo some of that work so we get the right estimate and so on for the contract. The way this contract went together, or the way the design services went together, there were actually 2 pieces. As you recall, there was the part from SR 167 to Thornton, and then you got another TIP grant that went from Thornton over to Valentine. And as we put those together, we kind of did them in pieces. And so now all this needs to be combined to make sure that it all works together as we move forward to the final. There is some additional work for hydraulics or stormwater, making sure that we're accommodating the correct stormwater volumes and so on. That needs to be done. We need to complete the hydraulics report to document those revisions and that information. And then it's a matter of combining everything into final, checking and rechecking, making sure that we get correct information into the contract documents so the bids are right and that we end up with the right cost for construction. The attempt, of course, being not to end up with a bunch of change orders and revisions during contract that cost additional money. We want to get it right before we go to add, so we're going to make sure of that. So that's the big item of work, is that task. The last one is pre-contract services. That's just getting things out, getting ready to go to bid, getting it through the bid process and ready to open, answering bidders' questions, preparing addenda if you find errors in something that needs to be revised during the bid time, and then making the recommendation of award letter. Again, if some of that work isn't needed, it won't be done, it won't be charged. So that's an important piece of this. So that's the work. I kind of muddled my way through it, but I don't know we're going to sit here and talk about too much detail all night, but I'm willing to discuss it with you if you'd like. If you've got any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer those questions.
I think that helps. What questions does council have?
One of the things that you're removing from scope, everything is still compatible and designed for it to be added in just as part of Valentine, not as part of this, on the intersection?
It will be, and that's part of the work, is to make sure that we don't end up with a 2-foot bump in the road or something. Yeah. And then the other part that's being removed is the trail. So, I mean, that doesn't really impact the design of the roadway.
Right.
What it impacts is there's some changes in quantities as to how this thing goes together. So that'll need to be making sure that we get those correct.
So what's your time, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
What's your timeline to have this complete? It says in here for budgeting 3 months, 2 months for design, 1 month for pre-contract. We want to get it done by the end of the year. Is that doable?
Yeah, we all, as long as we get started, 2 months is 2 months, and then we start in November, that's 2 months until the first of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, and then a month worth of getting things ready to get out to add, or less, depending on how the process goes. And then you go through your ad time for probably 3 weeks, 2 to 3, well, probably 3 weeks on this project, a little bigger. And then the time to award and execute. You should be out to work by mid-March, 1st April. That's the intent.
Okay, well, the short of this whole thing is that this additional charge, the reason for this to be accumulated was the additional duties that were put on Skillings and Conley by the previous mayor, and us not having any city staff. So things were done and delayed and everything. So in turn, we have accumulated these extra charges to complete the duties that needed to be done. So if we would have had city staff, we would not be facing probably this charges at all. But it's where we're at, and we need the design complete so we can move on. It's been delayed too long, way past due date now. So best thing is for us just to accept it and go on. It's not totally Skillings and Conley's fault. It's not totally the city's fault. It's due to the previous administration.
And the TIB grant fund covers this along with some of the capital water fund, right?
The TIB funds are a set amount. We don't have a final cost estimate yet, and we're still working through that. We also have a water main replacement as part of this project, which is Public Works Trust Fund money, which we still have. So the two of those together pay for the lion's share of the project, and then we will have some city funds, probably from the water fund and a little bit from different pots that will also be part of this project. And once we have bids in, we would then reassess, do we have the money? If not, where can we get the money? We can always reject it if we have to. TIB does have some authority to increase their grant as well if they believe it's warranted. And so once we have bids, it's a lot easier for them to say, yeah, we're willing to continue on with this.
So when you say we have to identify additional costs, has that been done, and do we know how much is in those costs?
We don't have a final cost estimate.
I do not know if we may have enough.
I would start planning that now, just to be safe.
Right.
Like, I know we can't plan for exact figures, but start picking where we're gonna get money from, and,
Okay.
because that's,
TIB will not consider giving us any money until we can show how much we are short. We cannot show how much we're short until we get all the bids in. So,
well, and
you're getting a cart ahead of the horse there as far as.
But by next Monday, I will try to have a better picture for you.
just, if we have to use city funds, I wanna know where they're coming from.
We
I know
don't
that,
We don't know.
I'll try to have a better picture for you next Monday night.
thank you. Okay, other questions for Gary or for Jim?
Well, I do want to, there's something else. Gary talked about the trail is not part of this project. And there's a reason for that, in that TID is state money. The trail is being funded by federal money. And if you build them simultaneously under the same contract, you now pollute the state money with this federal money. And everything you do on that contract must meet federal standards. By segregating how those two elements of the project are done under two separate contracts, we don't have that problem, because the federal requirements for everything that are done on that project, you basically have to have someone parked out there the whole time the contractor's out there verifying every single thing that goes into that project. TIB says, how much did you spend? Here's your check. The federal government wants tags for everything that has gone into the ground, because we have to pay for a portion of the relocation of the power lines. PSE actually has to use American-made steel in that relocation, even though, because we are paying for it indirectly, and the trail is what's causing them to have to move those lines. So those things come into play. That's why we're segregating it out, to try and keep the cost during construction lower on the road portion. But that brings up another issue. Skilling's County is not designing the trail. We solicited statements of qualification, and that's what the interviews are for on Friday. So that's another element that I want to discuss this evening.
So, any other questions related to this project? What's the council's pleasure on this? Next up is the CPG agreement.
This is a biannual agreement we have with the department, I think this one's with the Department of Ecology. They give us the money to collect hazardous waste and other waste that they prefer not go into the landfill. And generally, we hire Paul Devine, who manages the whole thing, and we're just basically a pass-through operation for the state money. And then we also get some money from King County to cover the balance of what's not covered by the state money on these. We do them at Alpac twice a year. We do it one in the spring, one in the fall. People bring their old batteries, their tires, their appliances, their old paint, motor oil, and we've been doing it for many years, and so it's the same type of agreement.
No significant changes in the agreement?
I didn't look at the details, but it's pretty much a standard agreement. They're gonna give you X amount of money. I haven't tried to compare it to a previous one, because I wasn't involved in the previous agreement, but it appears to be a fairly standard. I think it's the same agreement they send every jurisdiction that's getting the money, so.
Questions from council? Okay.
I talked about the interviews on Friday for the interurban trail. We had 2 statements submitted. Parametric submitted one, McLeod Records submitted one. There's actually 2 elements to this project. It is the interurban trail. One element is the Stewart Road section of the trail. The other element is the P.S.E. corridor element of the trail. We know we have the construction money for the Stewart Road section. We do not have construction money for the P.S.E., but we still have, we believe, about $250,000, which should cover design and the design of wetland mitigation and some of the other elements that we have to do for that project. We also have another pot of money, about $75,000, to purchase some property for a wetland mitigation site, which we have identified and we're getting a title report on and getting appraisal on so that we can move that forward as well. My question is, do any council members want to sit in on those interviews on Friday? One is from 9 to 10, the second one is from 10 to 11. If a council person wants to sit in, I've got copies of the submitted statements of qualifications for them to review beforehand.
Unfortunately, I can't, I'm not really.
Okay. Anyone else?
And that's 9 o'clock Friday,
The first one will be at 9 o'clock.
and
It'll either be in the conference room, possibly the mayor's office, or the Easter, but depends on if that still smells like dog food and it's cold, then we may move it elsewhere.
Mayor's office.
The final issue is we will need to have council approval on one of the right-of-way acquisition pieces for Valentine Avenue. The original appraisal came in at $29,700. You're allowed to make a 10% administrative adjustment. The property owner, however, wants substantially more in that it's the property at the corner of Valentine and County Line Road. There are a lot of trees there that have high value because of their uniqueness. And the appraiser that originally appraised those trees did not fully understand that. They did get some information from an arborist. Unfortunately, the arborist selected the wrong trees. So, because sometimes there's minute differences in the Latin names that can makes a huge difference. So the adjustment that the property owner had requested was based upon the value of the trees from their arborist. Our arborist was at about $8,000 and their arborist was at $18,000 for the trees. So there's about a $14,000 adjustment. So this is something that will have to be approved, that we can't just do staff-wise on this one because it exceeds the 10% rule. Would you like a copy of the paperwork? I can have that ready for you tomorrow.
Yeah, if you want to put it, I'd like to see it in the box.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll get copies in everyone's box.
is that the,
John Duncan's property.
on Don Duncan?
John Duncan's property.
Oh,
Well, his trees are up close to the road.
yeah.
Did our arborist look at that and validate it from what was submitted?
I'll have to go back and check.
Okay.
Most of this is being done by the city of Sumner, so.
Okay. And email's fine for me, if you don't need to put a copy in my mailbox, I'll copy.
I'll get you copies of what I have.
Yeah. So, the higher valuation, that was done by his arborist?
Yes.
Has our arborist gone in to say yes?
I'll have to verify that. That was,
Okay.
city of Sumner is the lead on this. One thing you get into with when you take trees lots of times you have to compensate triple value on some things, because it's just the nature of how it works. Because a tree that's planted today, that's maybe a 2-inch trunk, down the road has a lot more value. And so, a tree just, I was out in Carbonado, and a neighbor came in and was clearing his property. He cleared onto the town's property. So they had to cruise the timber, find the value of the timber, and then provide the owner with a bill for 3 times what the value of that timber was. It's part of timber law in the state, is my understanding. So when you get into trees, it's a whole nother issue. But I'll see if I can get more information for you.
So no council action this time. Are you looking for a vote Monday?
Well, I'd like to be able to move, because we need to move Valentine forward. As you're well aware, we have commitments with Curb that we cannot keep putting it further and further back. So I will get as much information for you tomorrow as I can and get it dispersed in your boxes or via email. Those that have email accounts for, I'll send out via email.
Please put a copy in my box, because my computer crashed.
I will get a copy in your box.
It's crashed.
Perfect.
Again.
Anything else?
Anything else for council? We're adjourned. Thank you.
Hey, Jen?